Welcome to the Congress, Awareness and Being Yourself. Today we have this exceptional possibility of speaking to Dr. König. Welcome. Thank you as well, and greetings from Bayern. Dr. König is a physicist, a consciousness researcher. He has chosen quantum healing and gives seminars in Europe and also overseas. My first question, which I pose to everybody: what do you, König, understand by awareness and being yourself? From my perspective, of course, I also have a broadened awareness from my development, but I also kept an eye on the natural sciences aspects. And for me, as a physicist, there was always a burning question of how to explain consciousness physically. And to answer that, you have to go deep into the world of physics and matter, because as we all know, we are made up of, as well as the things we can see and touch, and also the things we cannot, of atoms. And these atoms are made up of elementary particles. And since the last century, and the beginning of evolution, of quantum physics by Max Planck, physics has gone deeper into this subject. The first elementary particle that was discovered was the electron. Right at the end of the 19th century, shortly before Max Planck released his quantum physics theory, the electron was discovered. And today we know that there are electrons in all atoms. So we exist of electrons because atoms are made up of them. And these electrons are very important because electrons exchange light particles between each other. Physicists call this photons. The electrons exchange these photons like ping-pong balls, and this is called a reciprocal action. Energy and information is exchanged because the photons, the light particles, are transporters of this information. And you have to imagine it as a big collective. It is a very big amount of electrons, especially in our nervous systems. And in our brains, the nerve cells are connected by neurons. The electrons send their impulses through the neurons. And sometimes the electrons shoot across the neurons themselves. And through that, awareness is created. And so for me, awareness has to do with elementary particles. And our body and organism are optimally made to exchange this information between electrons. And for me, it was a very special thing at the end of my studies to come together with Jean-Emile Charron and got to know his theories. He was a nuclear physicist and died at the end of the 20th century. He developed an incredible theory about the electron and proved that electrons exchange energy and information, and that they also have their own particle density. Electrons almost have a memory on an elementary particle level, and the experiences that electrons make in the world, like bumping into other particles, they can repulse or attract each other with other charges, and by doing this the information is exchanged, which are the photons. And this is basically the basis of our awareness or consciousness. From my perspective and that of the consciousness research, we know that there are no memory molecules. Therefore, memory must be something with deep anchors in matter. And I've come to the realization that awareness is rooted on a quantum level. And electrons are also quantum objects, and photons and light particles can be described as quanta. As a matter of fact, light was the first object that Max Planck started his theory on. So the quantum theory had to do with the photons and the light particles. That was at the beginning, and then it stretched out over a decade. And in the 20th century, quantum physics developed and describes atomic structures, that being the tiny, tiny components that we are made of. That is the domain of quantum physics. On this level, all the answers can be found to describe awareness or consciousness. For example, if you remember something that you experienced, it's actually the electrons that are remembering, because the electrons have retained whatever happened at a certain period in time. This can be recalled as a collective memory. And so when you remember something, millions and billions of electrons are remembering it, through which an image is developed of whatever happened in whatever time, however long ago. So that to answer your question about awareness. So that is how awareness develops. And you came about quantum healing, and what motivated you to do that? It used to be called quantum healing, which is a modern term for it. It is constant and applicable and describes something that we knew before already. As soon as we started working with our own experiences and awareness and consciousness, we dove into the world of quantum healing without even really thinking about it before. And so that has everything to do with ideational realization and inner reflection. Ideational realization and unconscious actions such as our feelings or old traumas, we reach into our memory and recall information on a quantum level. And that affects body-orientated things like when you do yoga, you try to optimize the flow of electrons through the body so that the electrons can exchange their information among each other in a more optimal fashion. That means all the methods that we learned and practiced that develop our awareness and sharpen our perception. So we have something to do with quanta. And when you touch someone and give someone energy, then that is already quantum healing, because quanta are involved. Factually, every healing is quantum healing, because on a quantum level there is the exchange of information and the transportation of energy through which healing processes can be started. The whole thing became clear to me, and when I deepened my knowledge in the subject, how electrons contribute to it in our bodies, that we stay healthy and our metabolism functions properly. We know today that each person is made up of millions and billions of different cells. Our organs and entire organisms consist of different cells. These cells exchange lots of light particles, and biophysicists discovered this in 1990. And I'll mention one name, Professor Prock, who is still known widely. Fritz Albert Popp, who I also got to know personally, who died last year, is a discoverer of biophotons, so the light particles exchanged in our organisms that act on a cellular level to ensure that our metabolism works. so we can take in and expel nutrition, which only works if we have generated enough biophotons in the body. And so all methods contribute towards generating a higher biophoton number. For example, yoga exercises, massages, or stretching are very practical in a body-orientated level. Also, breathing techniques. When you breathe in and out, you don't only breathe in the oxygen that goes through our blood into the body, but on the air molecules are also light energy. So the best thing to do is be outside in fresh air, or if you're in a room, open up the window and try different breathing techniques. And through breathing, we apply the biophotons, which are needed for metabolism, and our vitality is also increased, which therefore increases our awareness. I also count introspection to the quantum practical methods. So if a person reaches inside of themselves to get to the surface of their consciousness, I also convey these things in my seminars, and they contribute to healing old traumas and tension, and help for fears to disappear. And so the entire energy potential of a person can unfold. And so it has a lot to do with self-development and individualization when we undergo awareness processes. And for me, the quantum practice contributes to this process along with quantum healing, which means when participants come to my seminar, they must first learn how to observe themselves. And by that I mean perceiving their own feelings and also perceiving their thoughts, and not just thinking, I am what I think. And they must learn to distance themselves from their own thoughts and analyze the behavior of a non-participating observer, and then you're able to get into a place of quiet. And then a higher organization is developed in the biophotons, and we have more energy available to us that carries energy through us, which we can use for healing purposes, as in touching one another and passing it on to a client or a patient. That is why non-medical practitioners and some doctors like working with complementary methods. Lots of the people in my seminars also come from healing careers, and they want to integrate these dimensions into their healing processes. So quantum healing can only happen if you go into complete and pure consciousness. It's very important to have your mental processes in check and to be able to play down your thoughts. It has to do with unintentions. Exactly, pure consciousness and pure energy. Then you become like a channel that universal awareness can flow through. And all the information a person needs to heal is there. Consciousness is like a lubricant or a way in which healing can be made possible. I always describe it like that when someone asks me what genetic healing is. It's like a plug. Before you can quantum heal, you have to heal yourself. In the method of consciousness, you realize that your own blocks and tensions and the things you're holding back must be resolved. And so the energy can move freely through the body. And that is connected to a self-accomplishment. You feel how the happiness comes to you, and it is natural when these methods are run through and the flow of biophotons is strengthened. And then you are able to passes energy on to other people, but I see this transferal as a nudge for the other person to go their own way and make their own steps. So it's like a nudge of consciousness. So what accompanies me but doesn't take the responsibility. The responsibility always lies with the person that has the issues. The way I understand it, it's a method, a technical method that one can use on oneself. I would say 90% of my quantum practical methods are directed at those people who practice these methods. And once your consciousness and your energy is on a high level, you can help other people and nudge them to do the same. So the way I see it, it is a way to make your life lighter and have more enjoyment and happiness and not take things so seriously. It's like changing levels from drama to peace. That's how I would put it, and I would say it is very spiritual. What is spirituality for you? It is also a big term. For me, spirituality is extending one's antennae, to put it that way. Perceiving small signals through which you can discover things in yourself that you didn't know before. And maybe discover something that has previously stopped you from living to the fullest. When you are restrained by a blockade or condition from something like the childhood or maybe even a previous life, all of this needs to be observed first and then freed in consciousness. And burdens and things that are almost hiding in the shadows have an effect on people. And these are things that affect you unconsciously, which restrains you and has a big impact on you. And through consciousness and awareness, you can get into this level, and light, harmony, and love, and our quanta are responsible for all of that. It's also a good opportunity for people that are very thoughtful to get to their feelings. Yes, you develop empathy. And empathy is often a condition that is set off by a healing process. And that is often a feeling that people don't have, and they have to accept themselves as they are in this moment. And you have to accept that this is the starting position, and it first has to be accepted. And through awareness, you increase your perception, and then you're able to, as I say, extend your antennae. Like pulling the antenna out of a radio, and you can then receive things and delve into the spiritual side or even one's previous life. And you can realize your talents and your skills. And for me, that also counts as spirituality. And what for me also counts as spirituality is knowing that somewhere up there is something bigger than me, something with more power. For me, it was a big realization and a very important part of spirituality to know that there are spiritual guides that help me and guide me, and the further you extend your antennae, the more you can come into contact with this other world. It's also an incredible thing, which means there is not only this side in which we live, which is of course incredible, and the ability to perceive all different things, but that contact and connection to a spiritual world rounds off the entire thing. For me, it is more complete that way. Without spirituality, I would never have been able to realize this knowledge. You are saying something incredibly important, something that's also coming from me, accepting something that is bigger than us, that is wiser than what we are. I can achieve a lot more that previously wasn't possible. You distance yourself from the materialistic view of things and also see what's inside. I have another question about quantum practice, especially about the ability to change one's thoughts, but it also has an effect on the body, with which you could, I assume, activate your self-healing process. In principle, you can always activate the self-healing process when you increase the level of biophotons in the body. All the methods that I've already mentioned contribute to a stronger coherence, through which changes are effortlessly possible. It's simple, it's actually all simple. Us people always want to make things more complicated and more complex than they are, but they're simple. You have to meet certain requirements so that things can change easier. And when these requirements are met, then everything flows effortlessly. It all sounds very, very simple, but it is so that one has an automatic block. And how do I stop that to continue this transformation process? As I said, the body-orientated methods I use firstly to load up on energy. And then it's about increasing the quality of the energy and to bring in a bigger coherence and harmony and the swings that flow through us. And this can only be learned when one goes into the quiet space and use the methods as the Eastern wisdom has shown us, as in meditation, and become an unparticipating observant of oneself and not be distracted by things happening on the outside. So a normal, unreflected person is continuously distracted, and mainly through visual stimulants. And our outer world continuously gives us things that require or want attention. Often people are only concentrated on their smartphones and are reduced to small pixels on a screen, and you don't realize that a lot is happening on the inside, as well as in the real world. If you concentrate your attention on your inside and on yourself, you come into this flow of awareness, and then you're able to organize your own thoughts. I always say thoughts are like clouds. They move in the sky and suddenly they're gone, and then maybe the next one will come along. Every thought is like a cloud, and it goes on, and between every cloud there are spaces. And in meditation, one should allow these spaces to expand. So in these spaces, there is the little spark of happiness. When you're able to decrease your mental process, you are able to increase the energy in your body, and that is experienced as a strengthened vitality. And healing processes are activated, and you're at peace on the outside as well. You're able to bring difficult situations into balance because you have the energy that you can send here and there. And then you achieve a stabilization of your own situation. And obviously, potential for more. You said that very well, this quietness. Yes, it is an important part in my seminars that the people really learn through inner attention to, and the attentiveness for the inner energy to bloom and harmonize, and that is essential. Or you can imagine it like this. Our conscience is like the surface of a lake. When the wind blows, there are waves, and everything is disorganized. And when you bring in stillness, the surface of the lake is very, very smooth. And if you throw a stone into the lake, you see small circles emerge on the surface. And you see how that action has an effect. So before you need that stillness, and then you can see the effects and stimulate processes and healing processes. Activation. Activation, exactly. Do you have a small exercise we can do daily for the viewers? Absolutely. My favorite exercise, which my seminars actually always start with, is the so-called shaking. It's a method that I developed myself in the middle of the 80s, when I had to process some things that happened to me as a child and my school days, and places where anger was hidden, and such emotions are saved in the stomach area and the solar plexus. And I'll show you, it's like a turning movement from the hips. You loosen your stomach, and any blocks that are in the meridian of the stomach, often there is a lot of energy that is stuck there, and you can loosen it. And this exercise can be done with any dance music or music with a good rhythm. Let the beat go on. Through the shaking and the loosening of the stomach, many of these blockages can be resolved. It's a very good exercise to start off with. You can adapt it and integrate it into your everyday life. And you make sure your feet are apart, about 30 centimeters. And the important thing is to move and turn from the hips. And with the upper body, you do the turning against the lower half. You can even loosen the breast area, and the heart area also has blockages. It's a very good exercise for the first 4 chakras to stop the flow of energy, and alone by doing this exercise, 50% of the energy can be increased. And then on the next level, you can do stretching exercises and do things from yoga and the Chinese traditions, and you can target blockages in specific parts of the bodies and solve them. Breathing techniques brings the energy level up to an immediate 90%. And sun energy added to it, you have a lot of energy. What we just spoke about, starting in your peace and stillness, you have to find that power and that strength. And the strength is already mobilized, but the energy is still a bit chaotic, like the surface of the lake. And then you have to continue on a mental level. The energy becomes coherent and harmonized, and then healing's practice can be used. What I also wanted to mention, I wrote a small booklet. It is The Small Quantum Temple. A publisher was really nice, and at the beginning of this year republished the booklet, and I released this booklet at the beginning of the century, and this is the 3rd or the 4th on the market. It's called The Small Quantum Temple. It has all of these exercises to do oneself, which means you can begin with it immediately. You don't need any previous knowledge. They're explained in a way that a beginner can understand them, and make a start of quantum healing and the method of self-development. It's also a really nice exercise to do when you find yourself in a stressful situation. Absolutely, even a small break in the office is enough. And take 5 minutes. The best would be to get some fresh air and just shake out the tension, or even in the car while driving to get rid of that tension. I like getting out of the car, getting some fresh air, and just shaking out all the tension. I can show it to you again and change the camera and try it out. So now I'm going to be a bit creative. So I'm in my living room, and now let me go over here, away from the camera, and move it a bit further down so you can see my hips. Can you still see me? This is what I call shaking. Remembering to breathe thoroughly and keeping your stomach loose. And the entire energy starts to flow. And so, as I've said, that is 50% of the energy. And then it continues with other methods, and the energy level can be increased. And now your energy has been increased a little. Could you tell us something about symbolism? You use a lot of symbols from older times. You're probably referring to the capital Greek letters. My ancient word matrix, a part of a theory. The book The Urwort outlines. I published a theory that is supposed to depict the world as a whole, and originating from trans-dimensional models. They guided me, and in my book I showed we live in a many-dimensional world. The four-dimensional space-time continuum. 3 dimensions for a space, and 1 dimension for time. It is the stage of the world, well, the outer world. And for a long time it was the only stage that the physicists had anything to do with. At the beginning of the 20th century already, many physicists felt that these 4 dimensions weren't enough to describe our world. So people who have already extended their antennae into the spiritual world, they knew that intuitively already, and there's more that we can't touch and realize. And the physicists realized it themselves. They have to be more dimensions. In the meantime, physicists are already thinking about these bonds, about these thoughts, and there are physical worlds that need up to 20 or 30 dimensions to describe all elements of the elementary particles. There are especially 2 physicists who guided me. The already mentioned Jean-Émile Charron, a French nuclear physicist, who died at the end of the last century, I think in 1998, and Burkhard Heim, a German theoretical physicist, who also died at the beginning of this century. So Heim and Charron were contemporaries, but they never had contact, and curiously enough, they both developed trans-dimensional models independently of one another, on a purely physical and mathematical level. But these models are actually very practical to describe everything I have spoken about, explaining what consciousness is, where do the particles have their memory from, do they save this information? And the answer is in trans-dimensions. For example, in Charron's theory, an electron is an 8-dimensional particle. 4 dimensions are the presence of the particle on the inside. That is our normal reality. But with Charron, there are 4 dimensions of inner room and space and time. And that is what goes on inside an electron. And there is a particle that is anchored to memory. That means through this trans-dimensionality, it's possible to connect matter and spirituality. And it doesn't need to be separated. And philosophers, which impact a lot of scientists nowadays still, say you can either describe matter or the spirit, and that they don't have anything to do with one another. But it's nonsense. You can see me gesticulating, and that's my spirit who is making my hand move. That will has to come from somewhere, and the attention to interact and to have an impact on something in matter, and the spirit is in matter, and both of them are connected. And that is also an object of my theory. In my theory, I explain that our reality is made up of different sections that are bound to one another. One section is the outer space of time, so what I call our world stage. And the other one is the other side. It's the inner world where we have our memories, the Akasha Chronics, and our mind, and these are a few words that explain that. And in between the other side and our side of the world, there is also restrictions and connections. And it's like we are stuck in the middle. We are organisms and we live in the material world, but we are also in the other world with our consciousness. And in the Urwort theory, I explain how that can be explained through the realization that there are more dimensions than the 4 that we have on our side in the material world. And it all has something to do with one another. And then the relaxation room, a 4-dimensional structure, and in my theory I show that it is on both this side and the other side. And there is something from which everything derives. On our side of the world, which I also show in my theory, it's a branch of the hyperspace. And maybe there are more parallel universes, and we don't know anything about that. But we leave it open and we assume that there are also other worlds and world stages. Because we are on this world stage and we have to make sure that we play this part in this world. And to go back to your question, the letters that I use for that, in the center of the Urwort matrix, there is a lambda, which is like a letter that looks like a roof, and inside is a theta that looks like an O with a small line inside, and it is a symbol for a vertebrate, and for me that is a symbol for God, for the source, for the absolute origin. In mind theory, I call the God Eli and integrate him with this lambda symbol. Funnily enough, for Einstein, it was also the lambda, which he called the cosmological constant, so something very primal, and out of that, the entire scenario is developed. Out of the lambda flow structural quanta in all directions and all dimensions, and with that tends the hyperroom, and then the sky is created, and out of this hyperspace all the other things were developed on the other side, on that spiritual side, and everything is connected and leads to an overall description of the course of the world. I like using Greek letters the most because they have a very high symmetry. Lambda is a beautiful symmetrical letter. The omega is also very symmetrical. Ta is also symmetric as much as axes, and you can reflect things over several axes. The Greek language, or at least the Greek alphabet, is somewhat archaic and more original than Latin, which serves our languages, and the Western culture is based on Latin and is actually already a degeneration of the Greek language. So one culture came from the other, and all these cultures lose something in this process. And I felt intuitively that if I use these Greek letters, I will be closer to the situation than if I had used the Latin language. In physics, it's generally that way. Physicists love the Greek alphabet and use them in their formulas. Astronomy interested me as a child, and in astronomy, the brightest stars are also alphabetized through the Greek alphabet. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, and so on. The lightest star is always alpha, and the second lightest is then beta, and so forth. So there's actually quite a banal reason for me using the Greek alphabet. Thank you. That also reminds me of mandalas from Tibet. Exactly, mandalas also have a very symmetrical form and come from our perspective, a very far culture, and naturally I try to support it on our culture. There is rich tradition and culture in the Eastern countries, and a lot of that has been wasted, and there are people who try to bring that out again. And now I have a completely different question. Do you have a motto? A life motto or a motto to live by daily? My life motto, which I think is also on my website, I want this planet to be whole, free, and complete again. And being intact doesn't only mean the people, even though the people stand at the center point of the Earth becoming intact again. The planet also plays a part because we are its caregivers, and it's the only thing we have. We don't have another one, and so we still have to manage for a while here on this Earth. That is my interest, for this planet to be whole and free. I would like to thank you for this incredible conversation that we've had, and for that last sentence. To make everything whole again. Yes, that's how it is.